Hey, what's up? How's it going? Okay, so I have this beautiful boy in front of me. I've been watching him since I've been a first year law student, and right now I'm a third year law student. One more semester to go after this break I'm on. And for me, he was very educational. I thought I was learning a lot from him, but after my first year of law school, I saw that his legal interpretations weren't exactly great, that they were highly opinionated and sometimes outright wrong. So over time, as I learn more about the law, I've been becoming more and more annoyed with this guy. But I still love to watch his videos. Some of his videos actually have some value to them. But this video is actually beyond anything I could imagine. It seems to be entirely opinionated, and I'm gonna go through it right now and let you know why that he's a political shill.
I actually don't know where to start. I'm so furious, and I'm so sad for our country that they claim to be the party of law and order. The hypocrisy makes it feel like ash in my mouth to even say it, because there's no depth, no illegality to which the president will not stoop. It's astounding.
Right, notice how he provides no evidence to that claim at all, right? He can't give you one fact, one crime that the president has done in this video. You would think first you set up the facts, then you set up the law, and then you explain why the facts apply to the law. This is an attorney, he should know how to do that. He doesn't do that. He's relying entirely on emotion. I don't know why, right? And I assume when he was saying party of law and order, he's talking about the Republicans. I mean, so far I think they have been. I think they have been, right? I mean, they haven't been supporting what's going on in the streets.
The president has completed what appears to be the first raft of pardons in the lame duck period. It's a murderer's row of the unpardonable. Though,
Right, yeah. I don't understand what he means by this, honestly, right? None of them are actual murderers. I think a lot of them have committed process crimes or failure to disclose crimes, like failure to disclose by Paul Manafort. I believe Roger Stone was charged with a perjury crime. Flynn was charged with a perjury crime. Like, these are process crimes. If your only crime is that you lied, I don't think you can equate that to murder. You know, that seems pretty crazy to me. But alright, let's continue.
an actual row of murderers are probably less morally blameworthy than the people that actually receive the pardons.
Yeah, okay, so murders are less blameworthy than these guys. Somehow they're more corrupt than the rest, right? That sounds like a great claim. That sounds like a very bold claim. You'd like to see how he's gonna reason that out, right?
Actual war criminals who were responsible for killing innocent Iraqi citizens, including
Okay, so he's saying he pardoned the Blackwater Guards. See, I'm not sure what the Blackwater crimes specifically. I know they fired on civilians, supposedly, but there are political implications to that, right? Like, the civilians, what was it, in Iraq? Yeah, the civilians in Iraq would want to see foreign invasions removed. So they're strongly incentivized to say whatever they have to get these guys out of here. And once again, I'm not saying these guys did nothing wrong. They probably did plenty wrong, right? But pardoning them after, what is it, probably 10 years at least? I think, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, but who cares really? Who cares about these guys? It's not like Bill Clinton didn't pardon his brother charged with drug crimes. It's not like Robert Nixon wasn't pardoned by the preceding president. So, I mean, these guys killing some civilians, quote unquote, where the story seems a bit hazy, it seems a bit politicized. Um, Probably not the worst thing in the world. And also, he was saying actual murderers are less blameworthy than these people. Well, these guys, according to him, are actual murderers. So, I mean, seems like a bit of a contradiction.
women and children. Ridiculously corrupt politicians like Chris Collins and Duncan Hunter, who were convicted of and were about to serve extensive prison sentences related to insider trading and also embezzling campaign funds, including but not limited to spending those campaign funds on extramarital affairs.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, I don't know too many politicians that don't do this. Don't get me wrong, insider trading, embezzlement, yeah, those are crimes. You should go to jail for them and all that shit. But let's not pretend like Joe Biden hasn't participated in this as well. Like, he entered the Senate with what? $40,000 to his name about net worth, and leaves with $10 million. I mean, not including what his son's been involved in. So to pretend, oh, he's pardoning all these corrupt people. I mean, you voted in a corrupt person, so don't give me that shit.
Actual traitors to this country, like Paul Manafort, who was a direct conduit to the Russians through Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska, and of course the president's cronies, including
Yeah, so Paul Manafort, I think, was an agent of Ukraine, didn't disclose that information, right? But here's the thing, Ukraine's our allies, right? Like, they're not Russia. They don't like Russia, to my knowledge. They do not like Russia. And you really can't say that he was somehow furthering Trump's foreign affairs, right? Because Ukraine, not favorable to Russia. They kept saying Russia was favorable to Trump and Trump was favorable to Russia, and so on and so forth, right? But I mean, Ukraine, not the worst country to be an agent of for us. Let's keep it real on that, right? I mean, we had Hunter Biden make millions of dollars under one of their companies. What was it called? Like Nepotismo? Yeah, that company there.
But not limited to Paul Manafort, but also Roger Stone and George Papadopoulos. There's just no end to the depravity. This is unprecedented in its baseness and its venality. We've just never seen anything like this in the US.
Unprecedented. Unprecedented. Can you believe that, right? Like Nixon when he quit, or I guess stepped down. Unprecedented that he, not unprecedented that he was pardoned there, right? Like he committed what we believe to be actual crimes. Now he wasn't charged for those crimes, but he was pardoned for any relation he had to those crimes, assuming that a crime was committed. And I understand that you can only pardon for crimes you actually committed, so it's strongly implied that he committed these crimes. He spied on Watergate and whatnot. So,
Effectively, every significant defendant who refused to cooperate with both the Mueller investigation and also just main justice have now been pardoned. The only exceptions being Rick Gates and Michael Cohen, both of whom actually testified and cooperated against the president. And this is tin pot dictator.
yeah, so Michael Cohen was a bad dude. He wiretapped people, I think in violation of wiretap laws. Really don't feel bad for Michael Cohen. His only relation to Trump is that Trump used him as a lawyer. He used many lawyers, though, I would think. I don't think that was Trump's only lawyer. And just because Trump's lawyer was a shitty person and a crook, that doesn't automatically equate Trump to being a shitty person and a crook. But I mean, you could use that as some evidence for it. It doesn't necessarily prove anything, though. It doesn't prove a damn thing.
Banana Republic level corruption. If this
Right, so Banana Republic level corruption, like Cuba, like Venezuela. Yeah, I mean, you really laid out evidence to show that this is some Venezuela level corruption, like communist dictator government corruption. Like, I don't know how you got to that conclusion. I really want to see.
seems like comic book villainy, that's because it is. This is not a close case. This is not an issue of red versus blue. This is just pure flat out corruption.
Yeah, it is an issue of red versus blue, right? Because you didn't once talk about Joe Biden's corruption. Because he has corruption out the ass. He's always had corruption. He's forwarded legislation, I believe, from Delaware credit companies for favorable positions in those companies. He's received tens of millions of dollars while working as a senator. His son has received at least several $1,000,000 while working, I guess, I don't want to say on his behalf, but the presumption seems to be that he was working in some capacity using Joe Biden's name, right? From the evidence that we have, he received money from Moscow. He received money from China. You know, the implication is there that he is trying to use some sort of political clout to his benefit, right? And that, I would think that's corrupt. That looks a bit corrupt. I don't know if that's necessarily a crime, but that looks like corruption to me. Maybe I'm crazy.
And I guess let's start with the bad news, because on some levels, this is worse than it appears. It's not
Yeah, because it doesn't appear very bad, and you haven't really given us any evidence that it is very, terrible, that it's actually morally reprehensible.
just that the morally reprehensible and actual criminals have been pardoned.
Yeah, as opposed to people that have been pardoned in the past, not actual criminals. Am I right? Am I right?
It's that this threatens the very fabric of our justice system.
Yeah, okay, explain how. See, right, he's an institutionalist. The pardon power is in the Constitution. It's a plenary power with no limitation to my knowledge, except that you can't pardon people for state crimes. And you can't pardon people for crimes that have yet to be committed, right? So explain to us how this actually damages our justice system.
In part, because this is just the opening act. There's no reason to think that President Trump is going to stop with these pardons.
I mean, okay, hold on. Is it November? Yes, okay, right. This is in November. I think he pardoned 20 to 30 more people since then, right? So you could highball it, say it's like 60 something, and let's even move the commutations up to 60 as well, right? Now he didn't get 8 years, so I mean if we double that, let's say it's 120, right? That is still less than Obama by almost 2 folds. Yeah, that's a lot less. That is less than George Bush. That is 4 times less than Bill Clinton. Like I said, if you give him 8 years and double it, that is still way, way less than all of these people. All right. So to say he's using it in an unprecedented way, that he's using it like we've never seen before, that is objectively false. But yeah, I'll continue.
In fact, there's very good reason to think that this is just out there to get people tired, that the worst pardons are yet to come. And it's the usual suspects who are the obvious candidates here.
See, no evidence for that once again. Get people tired? I mean, tired of what? Tired of these pardons? It's like, oh, I mean, the only reason you're saying that is because these pardons may not be as provocative as you make it appear, right? Like, people are just tired when they see these pardons. Are you serious? If these are like some heinous pardons, like he's pardoning child molesters on the regular, I would think you wouldn't be tired of that shit. Am I crazy?
There's no reason to think that the president will refrain from pardoning Jared Kushner, pardoning Bill Barr, pardoning himself.
Yeah, and he didn't pardon those people. You know why? Because they haven't been accused of crimes, right? I don't think Trump can pardon himself because he also hasn't been accused of any sort of crime, right? Like people say he's going to pardon himself, he's not going to pardon himself, right? You know why? Because he hasn't committed a crime.
Ivanka, Don Jr., Alan Weisselberg, the CFO of the Trump Organization. But President Trump doesn't have those lines. He doesn't feel shame, and he doesn't give a...
Yeah. How do you know what's in a person's head? Like, this is more of a psychology speculation lesson than it is about the law. Like, this video has nothing to do with the law. Let's keep it real on that. This is like a vlog channel all of a sudden. Like, Legal Eagle has just dropped the mask entirely of giving you any sort of legal insight. He doesn't give a fuck. And he said this wasn't about red versus blue. He has only talked about red. He never talks about blue. Even when they do some heinous ass shit, he does not care.
Damn about political norms. Because what happened here...
Yeah, that's the point. That's what people voted him in. It's crazy, right?
...is a really, really big deal. President Trump is pardoning a whole bunch of people who engaged in criminality in furtherance of the president's own agenda.
Yeah, okay, so let's just pretend, right, that no one else has ever done that. The president has never had somebody do something on his behalf and then pardon them. You know? I'm sure that's never happened in human history. I am fucking sure of it.
For his own campaign, and for other reasons that benefit President Trump personally. Because
once again, I am 100% sure that that has happened. In fact, you will see, mark my words, you will see Joe Biden pardon his son. 100%.
Problem with pardoning people who engage in actual criminality for the benefit of the sitting president. If the president is allowed to pardon and absolve guilt after the fact, there's a million ways for a sitting president to grift that.
And once again, Joe Biden is going to do that. 100% chance. 100% chance.
Take an extreme example. We often talk about how the president could kill someone on Fifth Avenue. But what if the president hired someone to kill a political opponent and then decided to pardon them? Or a less extreme example, let's call it stochastic terrorism, where the president just says, hey, it'd be really great if someone killed my main political rival.
Yeah, and he can do that, right? And the person that committed the crime of murder goes to prison forever. That's the problem with that, right? That's the problem with that theory. The person that does that goes to prison forever. And if they pardon them, there's a check on that, right? The check is impeachment. And the check is that you don't vote that person in again, or you don't vote that person's party in again, right? And how do you know if you murder someone, the president's actually going to pardon you? Let's keep it real on that. Let's keep it real on that. Actually, an absurdist argument.
And then if you actually pardoned that person, which potentially the president could do, well, then it just incentivizes actual murder of political opponents.
Right, and you could not give one real world example of when and how that happened, or has happened, or could happen, right? Like, you gave an example of, it's like, well, what if this, and then that happened? It's like, yeah, that's something that'll never happen. And if it does, they get impeached. What's the point of Trump hiring someone to kill another person now when he has 20 days left? What does that accomplish for Trump? Nothing! Surprise! Spoiler alert, not a damn thing. That's why your argument makes no sense.
And while that's obviously extreme, Vladimir Putin has tried this twice with his main political rival, Alexei Navalny. And obviously...
Right, allegedly, quote-unquote, allegedly, right? But that's also another country. Trump is not Putin, and we don't have the same laws that Russia does, alright? We're also not the same country as Russia, so, once again, an absurdist argument.
There's a state law issue here. Murder is generally a state law crime, so maybe the pardon wouldn't work. But how about this? What if the president intentionally engaged in all kinds of campaign finance violations, getting, let's say, billions of dollars for a campaign slush fund, and then just...
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't done that, though? Let's keep it real, huh? I think, what's her name? Omar Tashib? She's absolutely done that. She's admitted to doing that. If not straight up admitted it, then she's all but imply that that's what she has done, right? And yet, there's no video about her doing this. I mean, and Trump hasn't even done this, right? Trump hasn't even done this because he's been using, for the most part, his own money. But there's people that have actually done this, to my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, they have actually done this. And they're still walking free, right? But you're busy thinking of a hypothetical for Trump. Why not just use the example of Omar, right? She has literally done this. She's the best example. But no, you won't mention it, right? Because you are a proud Democrat, corporatist, lobbyist. So that's where his loyalties lie, if it's not obvious to you already.
Pardoned all the people who engaged in campaign finance violations for the benefit of the sitting president, who would then have the benefit of billions of dollars of campaign funds. If the president can pardon co-conspirators, or pardon those who engage in criminality at the president's benefit, or just simply hand out pardons like thank you cards, there is no end to gaming the system.
Right, and they have never proven that there was a conspiracy there. He was never charged with a conspiracy, Trump, and I don't think they would charge him with a conspiracy after the fact. But hey, if there was some evidence, maybe they would have charged him, Maybe they would charge Trump with conspiracy to, what was he conspiring to do exactly? Sign a deal with Stormy Daniels on the side. Is that a crime? And then kill her story. Was that a crime? Well, what's the crime then?
And of course, on the other side of the aisle, so far, the Republicans have been absolutely silent. Those people who will jump over themselves to fawn over this president, Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, Tucker Carlson, have said absolutely nothing.
Yeah, because he hasn't done anything wrong. It's crazy to think that, though, right? I mean, let's see. I show you this list of these pardons, and you're just like, whoa, this is unprecedented. Trump has barely pardoned anybody. And here you are complaining that he's pardoning everybody, the most hardened criminals on this planet. I mean, if you listen to anything that you have to say, that's the impression you're giving off. But the evidence just doesn't back it up. That's why you provide no evidence, because you know this. You know this.
Nothing. And like I said, this isn't a close case. This is not my side versus yours. This is
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Unless you're doing this for Joe Biden as well, and you might, because you think that he's never going to run again after this, after his 4 years are up. So you'll be free to do that, and you'll be all right to do that. And you'll probably be safe to do that, in fact, and you might even. But you have not once so far done this to any sort of Democrat that I know of, right? So to say it's not, it's what bothers me the most about your videos now, right? You're just like, you give off this impression that you're objective, and you do nothing to correct it. You do nothing to correct it. You even go so far as to say it's not about red versus blue with you. It absolutely is, because you don't do this to the other side. You never do this to the other side. Why? Why? I ask you. Serious question.
an affront to the actual rule of law. Really, at this point, only
How is it an affront to the rule of law? Pardons? Pardons are literally written in the Constitution.
Ben Sass has had the temerity to even criticize the move, saying that this is rotten to the core. Well, gee, thanks, Ben. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to look this up, but I'm assuming Ben Sass works in a district that leans left, right? That he's probably a Republican in a district that leans left, like Maine or something. That's the only way that that makes sense for him to do that. I'm sorry, but it's always political, even when it's not. There's a political reason behind it.
By backing those words up with absolutely no action whatsoever. Because there's a lot of damage that's actually going to keep happening before January 20th gets here. And there is absolutely nothing that...
Yeah, I will say it. I thought about not saying it. I will say it. Okay, so he filed some Freedom of Information Acts, Devin here, against the White House, and we never heard a word about those suits. I'm assuming they failed spectacularly. That's why he's never brought it up again once he talked about it. That's the only thing I can imagine. I might have to look it up after this, but I'm pretty sure, like, talk about doing nothing. Well, I mean, Devin has at least tried to do something, but he's probably failed at it so far. In fact, I think he failed spectacularly. That's why he won't tell us about it.
It's in the works to try and stop this. But I shouldn't criticize Ben Sass. At least he came forward publicly and at least criticized the president. Everybody else seems to be happy just to sit idly by and silent.
Yeah, why might that be? Is it because they're complicit in bad shit? Or because he did nothing wrong? I mean, you've obviously made up your mind on this, but you're going to have to start giving us some evidence of what Trump did wrong, like some facts. Some hard, like a link to a picture, a dossier that's not made up, something. At least when Ben Shapiro makes a video, he's like, I'm reading from this article here. This is what it says. This is why I believe it, because he's a statist, right? He's a libertarian, but mostly he's a statist, where he sees the stats, he looks at the facts, and he's like, well, the data says this, so I'm going to go with the data. And unless you have some horrible, horrible politicized data, there's no reason not to go with the data, right? But you're not even using data of any kind. You're just like, well, I heard some things, and this is what. In fact, you're not even citing your sources. You're not even citing your sources at this point. So, yeah. Where's this information coming from? Nobody knows. It must be true because you're saying it.
And unfortunately, it gets worse. Contrary to what you might read on Facebook or Twitter, Trump is almost certainly not going to face criminal scrutiny for even pardoning Manafort or Stone or anybody else.
Right, because you can't be charged for pardoning people. That's just not something that happens. I looked this up actually to see if there was any limit by the courts of the pardon power. There isn't. And I know for a damn fact that no one has ever gone to jail for pardoning somebody, because the whole point of the pardon is to remove the crime from somebody's record, right? Or to get them out of prison or whatever.
Absent actual evidence that there was an explicit quid pro quo between Trump and his co-conspirators.
Look at that. He's saying, well, we don't have the evidence that he did something here. Him and his conspirators. He's calling them conspirators. No evidence. He admits there's no evidence. And he's still going off. Like, man, if only we had some fucking evidence. Yeah, no shit. That's the whole problem with this video. Like, you've really dropped the ball on this one, Legal. Like, you've made some bad videos before, but this is unbelievable. Truly unbelievable.
There's not going to be criminal repercussions. There's just not. And I don't think...
and even if he did commit a crime, even if there was evidence of the co-conspirator type BS that he's talking about here, there is reason to suggest he wouldn't be charged with a crime anyway. Especially if he did it while he was president, right?
Even an aggressive attorney general in the next administration is going to change that. It's an abuse of power. The guardrail is impeachment, and when you have a couple of days left in the Trump presidency, impeachment is no real guardrail whatsoever.
Right, that's why just about every president in history has pardoned at the end of their term like this. That's why it always happens. What's your point?
So, for all intents and purposes, it's unlikely that President Trump is going to face any kind of real scrutiny as a result of these actions. And wow.
Right, and he's not really getting scrutiny now, is he? Because he didn't make too many absurdist choices, right?
While these are uncharted waters...
How? How are these uncharted waters?
Absent very strong proof of a separate crime like extortion or bribery.
Which we don't have! That's the whole fucking problem with this whole video. You're talking about something that doesn't exist, as if it does exist, and then you're giving hypotheticals of how it could exist. And they're very bad hypotheticals. Hypotheticals that really would never happen. And if they did happen, there would be consequences for those actions.
These pardons are not going to be declared illegal. And it's not even clear that if you found this separate criminality that it could be declared illegal.
Right, because pardons are not illegal.
The pardons themselves. And don't expect future state or federal prosecutions of Manafort or Stone. The complications are probably grave enough that it's unlikely that they're going to face punishment for their actual crimes.
Right, because I think they committed crimes that are federal in nature. At least, I know Manafort, I think that's a federal crime you have to disclose if you're an agent of another country. Like, that wouldn't be a state crime, because that would be weird, right? The states have no control over that. So it wouldn't be state crimes for Paul Manafort. So they really couldn't charge him for that same crime on state side because it just doesn't exist. And I don't think it could exist, right? I think that's stepping on the toes of the Congress and the federal Constitution. And the Constitution and Congress have the supremacy clause on their side, so it would never happen.
And like I said, the pardons will continue. The message has been sent that if you uphold your silence against who is effectively a mafia don...
How?
You're going to get a pardon. You will be...
Really? Really?
Be rewarded for your service and contravention of justice. There's no...
Yeah, like every other cabinet member of any president ever.
Real silver lining there. That die is cast. That norm has been broken, and you can...
That norm has been broken? Okay, so it's never happened. It's never happened before, right? Like, no president has ever pardoned someone that's done them favors before. No, none of them. Zero. Unbelievable.
Expect that future administrations are going to take note if there are no real penalties for abusing the pardon power this way.
But what are you, stupid? Really? They're going to take note of the abuse of pardon powers? There is no abuse of pardon powers. Every president, just about every president before Trump has done this with the pardon powers. They're not going to be like, oh shit, you can do that with a pardon? Is that what a pardon is? Whoa. Like, they already know. They already know, and they've been doing it for decades, centuries even. They already know this.
And it's ironic, too, because traditionally the pardon power has been grossly underused.
Bullshit. I mean, grossly underused by Trump, maybe.
Thousands of people who receive grossly inappropriate sentences every year. For all the good that the justice system does, it does a lot of bad too.
Wait, so I assume you mean by the federal government, right? Because you can't pardon those people if they're state crimes. Like, that's where most of them are being charged, by the way. That's where the vast majority of them are being charged in the state. President can't do shit about that.
Or at least it's often overzealous in punishing crimes. And there are a lot of people who are in jail that arguably should not be. And historically,
Man, he must have been a prosecutor for Portland or something.
presidents are much more likely to underuse the pardon power than they are to overuse it.
Yeah, every president but Trump, you could argue, overused it. I would think in this case, right?
And to date, we've never seen anything like what President Trump has done.
Look at this. I'm pretty sure he cited an article from Vox. Now he is citing an article from The Atlantic, who has lied about Trump talking crap on soldiers for political clout. Like, to actually get their candidate to win, they have done this, right? Because everyone they implicated at the scene of this alleged shit-talking of soldiers saying that they were losers, that they're glad, he's glad they're dead or whatever. Yeah, everyone there has denied that claim, even the people that hate Trump. And, I mean, these people are actually propagating knowingly false news at The Atlantic, right? It's truly shameful stuff. And just like the New York Times, too, they're all on this, they're all on the left. And that's fine, I have nothing against leftist media. But they have outright lied about these articles. And Fox, I know, I can't think of a specific instance right now, but I can think of The Atlantic and the New York Times, for example, which, Legal Eagle has also cited, has straight up said, Trump has not paid taxes or he paid $500 on the taxes, which is an absolute lie. We know that if they had his actual taxes, they would have been leaked to the internet instantly. Instantly! Someone at the New York Times would have done it to either make Trump look bad or just because you can't control everyone in a news station, and that's what they do, right? You best believe if this story was real, just like the Hunter Biden laptop, it would have also got leaked to the internet fucking instantly. And it didn't. That tax return information never came up. And he's citing these bogus political media outlets. That's the problem, though, right? I have no problem with these outlets. The problem is they are highly political to the left, makes them inherently suspect. And I'm not saying I'm not suspect of Fox News as well, right? You should always suspect any sort of media that has a clear bias, especially one that has a clear bias and pretends they don't. That's the worst of all, because that is actively lying to you, like CNN.
But the whataboutism is strong. People have pointed to the pardoning of Mark Rich by President Clinton. And that pardon rightfully sparked bipartisan outrage. It sparked...
Right, look at that. Right, look at that. Okay, so he actually gives an example of something that, of all of his arguments here in the video, he actually gives an example that makes Trump look good of all the facts that he cites, which is just this article, right? It actually makes Trump look good. Of all the evidence Legal Eagle has and thinks Trump is the worst president ever and this and that, this is the best he comes up with. It's something that actually makes Trump look good. It's like, well, presidents may have done it in the past, though. I mean, it happens. Yeah, that rightly sparked bipartisan outrage, but the stuff Trump has done has wrongly not sparked it. Yeah, it's just weird, it's just weird.
Congressional inquiries. This is not to say that that particular pardon was in any way just or correct. People were rightly outraged about it. But this is so much worse.
Yeah, and he hasn't explained how. And clearly you're in the minority. People don't agree with you. You know why? Because, like you said, they're not outraged by this.
There was and should have been political fallout for that pardon. But what we're seeing out of the Trump administration is much, much worse. It's dozens of individuals who have a direct connection to the president. And the pardon is being used in a way...
Direct connection to the president. Wow. Okay, define connection to the president, because anyone they speak to presumably has a connection to the president, right? Any person that speaks to the president has a direct connection to him, in my theory of the definition. So, typically, people that know the president get pardoned. Is that correct? Unless you're in prison and they commute your sentence, which is not a pardon. That's a commutation, which I believe is different. It might not be. But I know it's the result of a pardon as well. I mean, you get pardoned, obviously your sentence is commuted as a direct result as well. But I think they can commute your sentence without pardoning you. And if you're in prison, you're probably not able to talk to the president, but you probably have as well. And I don't think that's enough to suggest that you have a direct connection to the president if you're calling him from prison. But if you have his cell phone number, or if you can call him and you're not in prison, then you probably have a direct connection to the president. I would think that should be the definition.
That really does undermine the rule of law. And that's not an exaggeration, because it's going to change the way that political institutions use the pardon in the future. And it's not going to get better.
How? How has he used it in a way that's different? I still don't know.
Unless there are real punishments. Now, I may be your discount John Krasinski, but let me try to give you some good news here. The first is that Paul Manafort is not going to get his townhouses or ostrich jackets back. Under ex parte Garland, a pardon does not restore offices forfeited or property or interest vested in others in consequences of the conviction and judgment.
Damn, he actually did some legal research in this, though I would not trust it at all, because it came from legal. But he's probably right about that. He probably is right about that.
So at least the Mueller investigation will still have turned a profit. You also probably know that the...
Wait, what? Turned a profit? I'm gonna assume he just means it was successful. Like, if he's saying like the Mueller investigation made money off that, that is pretty reprehensible, actually, if that's true. I hope that's not true. I hope that was like a figure of speech on his part, because that's a little disgusting.
These pardons don't really affect state law prosecutions, if there is indeed state-based criminality. We know that there are ongoing investigations, particularly in New York, but...
It took him 11 minutes to get the nuances of the pardon powers. It's crazy. Besides saying, hey, it's probably not going to work, it's probably not going to be limited, he actually gives, like, some legal analysis right here. 11 minutes in.
I counsel you, don't hero worship the investigators. We've been burned time and time again that sometimes that's just too much pressure to put on people like New York AG Tish James and Manhattan DA Cy Vance.
Right, because, you really shouldn't put pressure on people to find evidence that isn't there, right? I actually agree with him on this.
A lot of the criminality that has been pardoned is purely federal, with respect to lying to federal prosecutors, with respect to federal campaign finance violations and insider trading. It's unlikely that a lot of those crimes have state law counterparts that could even be investigated and punished.
Right, because they're typically only federal crimes, right? Like, I believe insider trading is a commerce crime, right? So that's, the power of commerce is regulated by the Commerce Clause. The states really can't regulate that shit. Not when it comes to, commerce that's between multiple states like that. So it's like they could try to regulate commerce in their own state, but if it affects other states in a way, then they really can't. In which case, I believe it's mostly, securities law, federal law, for insider trading as a direct result, because these corporations are like multi-state, multinational. That's the only thing that makes sense for them, is to be federal laws.
Let alone will be. That being said, Paul Manafort was convicted of numerous different tax crimes, and it's likely that New York State has similar state law tax crimes that he could be charged with. And even better news, recently the New York legislature closed a pardon loophole that would have prevented prosecution of someone who receives a pardon when there is an ancillary New York State law to prosecute them under. So while...
I thought that was already the case, right? I thought that if there's the same law federally and state, and you get pardoned under the federal law, you can still be charged with the state law. I may be misunderstanding this, but I thought that was always the case. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
While Paul Manafort was initially successful in appealing his New York prosecutions, it's possible that now that New York has closed this loophole that they can move forward with prosecuting him on state law crimes. It's an open question. We'll see what the New York appellate courts...
Right. So, Nick brought this up, and I kind of agree, right? There's a thing in the Constitution called the ex post facto clause, where you can't sign a crime into law after the crime has been committed and then charge the person with it all of a sudden, after the fact that he was pardoned, after the fact the crime no longer exists and it was taken care of, and you're going to recharge him with that. I mean, that could be double jeopardy if the jury was already selected in his case, and that could also be ex post facto. And personally, I don't care if it is. I'm just curious to know what his reasoning is here and why he didn't bring up those other issues.
Hold. You've also likely heard a lot about the Fifth Amendment with respect to being pardoned. And it is indeed true that receiving a presidential pardon, if you accept it, does limit the scope under which you can claim the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. But
right, every state constitution has to have that Fifth Amendment right. It applies to the state through the, it's the 14th Amendment? I think so. But yeah, so the Fifth Amendment in our federal constitution, right? The big one, the big boy, has the Fifth Amendment right to right against self-incrimination, right? And as a direct result, that is communicated to the states under the 14th Amendment, which says that the state is bound by the Bill of Rights and essentially the federal constitution. So, in other words, even if the state didn't have the Fifth Amendment right to self-incrimination, right against self-incrimination in their constitution, it would be there implied. But just about every state has it in there because it has to be in there anyway, right? It's almost like you're sending a political message by not putting it in there, and it's not a favorable one to put in, you know? It's not a favorable message to send if you just omit that from your state constitution.
But it's unfortunately not absolute. If you face state law liability, then you can still invoke the Fifth Amendment privilege. So this
Thank God for that.
will indeed help both prosecutors and investigators with respect to inquiries related to these pardons and the underlying criminality, but it's not going to help that much, unfortunately.
Right, because he knows that his legal analysis has no weight here, that the pardon power is absolute.
Additionally, it's possible that the pardons themselves might be crimes.
Okay, this is where he just goes off the deep end entirely. This historically has never, ever been a thing. Imagine if this was a thing, right? The pardons are crimes. Trump is charged with those crimes. Could you imagine every single Democrat president after Trump? Do you not think that if they somehow made an amendment to the Constitution, or the Supreme Court, for some reason, decided that these pardon powers should be more limited, could you imagine what they would then do to their political opponents after every presidency? Every single president would go to prison after their term was up. Every single one. Or the pardons would just cease to exist, which is the more likely outcome.
Maybe. I wouldn't put too much stock in this, but remember that I said that President Trump is not going to face criminal prosecution for these pardons. Well,
and I do want to state there's a reason the pardons exist, right? Because I guess you could say that the framers of the Constitution foresaw that political opponents of the president will seek to attack his allies politically or with politically based criminal prosecutions, right? That's the presumption here. So if you severely limited the pardon power, you would actually be increasing the likelihood that political opponents would be thrown in prison in the United States. Like, I believe Devin identified himself as an institutionalist, that the institutions do good. He is actually advocating for the institutions to be corrupt and do horrible things to people.
it's possible that he might. There's a slim chance, but it's possible. We've seen time and time again that these members of the Trump administration, especially the ones who have been around since the beginning, are completely inept. The DOJ has already gotten...
Yeah, like most government officials. You're an institutionalist and you seem to think that the other government officials are not inept, which is weird, right? The fact is that government by nature is inherently inept and corrupt. And we see that the more money a government's given, the more money tends to disappear because that's just how it works.
Wind of a pardon for purchase scheme related to Elliot Broidy. And it's possible that there is an explicit agreement between members of the Trump administration and these pardons. It's possible that people did attempt or were successful at buying a pardon.
It's always possible for every president, right? Every president that this is the case. But where's the evidence? We don't have the evidence, right?
You can look at the list of people who received pardons, and it's not just Republican cronies and Trump cronies, people who actually engaged in...
Yeah, let's talk about this too, right? He pardoned some Democrats too, right? So we can say that there's one thing Devin was right on. It's not a right versus blue issue when it comes to these pardons. It's not. It really isn't, because he's pardoned some Democrats. Some Democrats that were thrown in prison under the Obama administration.
In real criminality, but also those who engage in real criminality and are also just very, very rich. People that don't necessarily fit into this category of people who are being rewarded by the president for their service to the president. People who might have the means to actually buy a pardon.
Okay, let's just talk about how ridiculous this is. Trump is unfathomably rich. He is fucking rich beyond belief. So the whole premise that you can tempt him with money, of any fucking president we've had, of any president, he's probably one of the richest to come into office. Right? So to suggest that he is particularly vulnerable to being paid off for a pardon is ridiculous. It is actually like brain dead thinking. It really is. He's the least vulnerable. He's also the least vulnerable to political lobbying as a direct result. And I think that's why you hate him. As a former political lobbyist, Devin, I think that's why you hate him, because he can't be controlled by this corporate bullshit.
And if those explicit agreements are out there, it's possible that the agreement was memorialized and that emails or documents will leak, that the attorney-client privilege will be violated because of the crime-fraud exception. And someone might talk after Trump can't actually pardon people anymore.
Yeah, that's very unlikely because they don't exist. But I would really like to see that if it's true.
If there is an actual clear quid pro quo between President Trump or other members of his administration and the granting of a pardon, it could conceivably give rise to independent criminality and potential punishment. That's a big if.
See, I thought there was this thing. See, the lawyers have to obey the model rules, the American Bar Association rules, and there's a rule 8.4. I mean, you have to swear to these rules, or you could be subject to liability. You could be sanctioned as a lawyer if you don't follow these rules. It's something that we have to follow as lawyers, right? I'm not a lawyer, but when I become a lawyer, I'll have to follow these rules. And one of them is you can't essentially lie to people or mislead them knowingly, right? And it makes me think that Devin is either extremely ignorant or he's knowingly lying to people, right? He's not, because if you assume Devin's extremely ignorant, you have to assume also that he's not researching any of the claims from other sources that don't line up with Fox and the Atlantic, right? That's the assumption you have to make. He's doing essentially no research, which is pretty crazy if that's true. Like, for a lawyer to do that, that will get you sanctioned on its own in most court cases, right? Because in that case he'd be looking at the favorable cases, but not the disfavorable cases, and that's also an ABA rule where you have to bring up the cases that hurt you when you're making your argument on case law. In most court cases, right? So he's not doing that, but he is misleading people, if not knowingly. But I would like to think he's not this dumb. I think he knows what he's saying is BS, but he says it anyway because that's what gets him views, right? That's what gets promoted on YouTube.
But hopefully, this ends the discussion about future prosecutions, or at least future investigations. Past pardons have led to congressional investigations, and this one absolutely needs investigations, if not outright prosecutions. And
right. What a waste of money that'll be. But sure, why not?
If not prosecutions on a federal level, then prosecutions on a state law level. And hopefully this represents the absolute zenith of presidential power. At the moment, the president has never been more powerful. The president
never been more powerful. The law regarding the president has changed zero during Trump's presidency, right? He hasn't even done more executive orders than Obama, to my knowledge, right? Which is how the president can exercise the most unprecedented power. Like, that's the window that they would do it if they were going to do it, right? That's how they would do it. And to say he has almost, in fact, the most unchecked power in history, that is an outright lie. Like, I don't know how you can come to that conclusion. I really don't.
This is just plain cronyism and corruption.
I mean, let's assume that's true. That's no different than how Washington's always been, right?
Then so be it. We can demand a constitutional amendment or other congressional means to put limits on this power. Because that's what Americans deserve. We fought a war to throw off the rule of the king, and these pardons come as close as Americans ever have to reverting back to tyranny.
Yeah, notice how afraid he is of these pardons now that Trump is leaving office. Isn't that pretty scary? That's like a tacit admission that the incoming president is going to do worse, or worse will be done with these pardons. He's not admitting it, like, explicitly, but that's the read between the lines explanation, right? He knows. He knows. He's seen the riot in the street, and he's like, well, that group kind of supports the party that's going into office right now, so maybe, we don't want those kind of people making those decisions, using that executive power or pardoning people. But, I mean, hey, whatever. And by the way, these people that have aligned themselves to the left, Antifa and whatnot, and Vox, and the Atlantic, they actually hate Devin. They don't hate him specifically, but he's an institutionalist, and they hate institutionalists. They absolutely despise him. And yet he still goes to guard for them, and he will probably be the first one they noose, if anyone, when they come into power. And yeah, that's the end of the video. Let me know if you like this, or if there's anything I can do better. Feel free to leave a comment. Thanks, and have a good one. See ya.